Verbal. How you doing, John?
Good. How are you doing?
Hanging in there. Other than like I said, my hair's got a life of its own these days. But at least I got a cut. You can see kind of my ears a little bit better now, so all's
Yeah.
good.
Well, as I say, for me, you just let it go. No matter what you do to it, it
Uh,
always looks the same.
oh, isn't that crazy? Oh man, I wish I had that problem. So what's happening your way? What's your brain been buzzing around?
So, well, since last week, and and even maybe for a few weeks more than that, we've been starting to talk more and more about like what the philosophy for a new party would look like, and just looking at the news and sort of some of the things that are going on, I think one of the things that's really important to express if you're going to make a new party and really have a position on is sort of like a judicial philosophy, because so much of what goes on, and this is a local. I mean, this is really hugely local. Judicial elections for judges, district attorneys, local sheriff, even. There's so many things that you need to make a decision about. Who are you going to appoint as a judge? Who are you going to
Right,
elect as a district attorney? And so much of it comes down to, I think, some simple concepts that have historically been very American. And, I think we're losing that in a lot of the way that our judiciary works. And so there was a few things that I was going to hit. And the first, and I'll just throw them out here.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was the presumption of innocence. That's hugely American and hugely important. Um, the fact that our judicial system works as an adversarial system, I think, is one of the biggest concerns we have in the country right now. So I'll get to that pretty quickly. And then the role of prosecutors too, and the idea of the prosecutor's role is not to get somebody. The
right,
role of prosecutors to seek justice. And
right.
I don't think we look at that enough because there's so much of a culture of like trying to win a lot of the time. And so if you have a prosecutor who is political,
Yep.
sometimes winning isn't the same thing as doing justice or doing the job of a prosecutor. But the first thing that I really wanted to hit more than anything else was the whole idea of our adversarial judiciary system. And I think that, if you look around at a lot of the big cities and you see the increasing crime issues, and you hear a lot of complaints by law enforcement about how, they'll arrest a person for the 87th time, and then the district attorney will just, let them back out on the street without ever even charging them. And so I think there is a streak in all humans that you want to see fairness and people being treated well, and
Right.
maybe even leniency in a lot of cases. But what I think is lost in that argument is that we need an adversarial system for the system to work. You have to have somebody who's on the side of enforcing the laws. If the prosecutors and the defense attorneys both are just looking to let everybody go, you don't even have a judicial system anymore.
Right.
So I think what we see in a lot of cities, and LA would be a good example. And then, of course, New York, Chicago, where you hear about a lot of the problems. You have these district attorneys who are essentially, advocating for like social justice policies. But the problem
Right.
is that's not really the job of the district attorney. I'm not saying that those philosophies may not even be warranted or that they aren't a great thing for defense attorneys to be talking about. But if you don't have somebody who's at least trying to execute the laws and say, arrive at a just conclusion for victims, well, then you don't have
Right.
a judicial system anymore.
Right. Well, and it's a really interesting point because I never really thought about it in the sense that prosecutors would be focusing on, and that this definitely has happened, like up in San Francisco and
Yeah.
places like that, where things have really kind of gone off the rails a little bit in terms of some of the crime and things that are going on up there. That they would be the advocates for social justice. Not that they don't fundamentally believe in that concept,
Right.
but that's really not their role. It's like it comes back to, okay, what's your role?
Right.
And the role is hey, you prosecute based on the existing laws, and the consequences or the results of that are really not what you're supposed to be focused on.
Right.
I get it. It's all kind of a gray area a bit, because it's like, well, at the same time, if I'm overwhelmed with cases
Mm-hmm.
and I see some of these, charges or people being arrested for things that are, questionable maybe, then, that I just kind of throw that all under social justice. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's so it gets to be a little bit murky. But now, I mean, it's because it is a political, that part of the job of this justice system is a political job
Right.
in many, many ways, that politics is just taken over. And and so I guess the question is, how do you create a system that keeps those prosecutors sort of independent, basically, that they're not really being bantered by the winds of the political winds that are going on around them, and doing their job. And I don't know how that is, how we do that.
Well, first of all, it's very difficult because, I mean, the idea that you can be completely unbiased, I don't really believe in. I think everyone has their biases, everyone has their opinions. That's just sort of the way it is. That's baked into the cake.
Right.
But I think that's why it's important as a party to have a judicial philosophy of not having political aspirations in your prosecutors. So basically,
Right.
you're looking for people who believe that politics should not enter into the job of the prosecutor. And the prosecutor's job is to seek justice. So when there are victims of crimes, you seek justice for them because that's your responsibility, to abide by the laws and be the custodians of the judicial system, to the extent that it's more important to the prosecutor to make sure that everything is above board and done correctly than it is to get a particular outcome in any particular case. And as I say, as a political party, I think you could extol that idea and say, look, our party, if you put us into power, is going to look for prosecutors who are dispassionate, who follow the law, and will act in accordance with the will of the legislatures and the executives as they pass laws. But they will be independent in their decision making. So again, like you say, some places are just overwhelmed, and there's always going to have to be some process of decision making, and that could always be something imperfect. But if you have a district attorney in place that says, look, my main goal is to seek justice for victims of crime, that person should be able to prioritize those things which are really hurting the community, and other things that are sort of, more or less meaningless and can be let go for a little while.
Right.
But, you have to start from the place of, as a prosecutor, it's my job to enforce the laws and see that they are enforced fairly, but nonetheless enforced. So you can't have essentially defense attorneys as both defense attorneys and prosecutors, because it can never work. So again, that's what I'm saying. As a political idea, what our party would say is our philosophy is to have people, dispassionately prosecute crimes. And then it's the role of the legislatures to decide, what are the laws that are appropriate for them to be enforcing.
Right. Yeah. And it can go both ways. I mean, we're kind of talking about social justice, and I think that has a connotation of, that means, hey, we want to kind of just let people get off on, be a little more lax in terms of how we prosecute people. But the reverse is true too. I mean, you do have places where people think, hey, I'm going to put people in jail for a traffic stop violation for,
Right.
even though, so you kind of get both sides of it. And I guess it comes back to, I mean, like with judges, at least here in California, I mean, you, depending on the level of judge, I mean, they are an elected office, but they're not,
Right.
they're not political in nature. Although I think obviously that's even become fairly questionable,
Right.
because they'll, in their little write-ups, and they'll say about how we're really hard on this or really hard on that, or we want to seek justice for people of, certain populations or whatever. And so it's become very political. And I don't know if that's just one of those things that just by the nature of the, the emotions of it all, and the, just the, because people get so tied up in the whole criminal, and I think we're talking more criminal than civil kind of stuff, generally
Yeah.
speaking. They get tied up, whether they're the victim or they're somebody that feels like they're being unfairly prosecuted,
Mhm.
that it just really makes it hard for both judges, prosecutors, probably defense attorneys have the easiest part of it, because it's like, hey, my job is I'm going to do whatever it takes
Exactly.
to get you off. And that's why they do the most advertising, right? So,
Right. But going back to the sort of the political idea of it is one of the things that you could do on a local level with the new party is you could put out advocacy papers for things like district attorneys and judges and try and
yeah,
provide information to people, because once you have an organization that has a stated philosophy, which is we just want judges to call balls and strikes. We want them to be a fair
right,
umpire. We don't
right,
want them to have an agenda. We just want them to look at what the law says, to listen to the arguments of the attorneys, and then come to a decision. Basically, you want to have a rational person who can be as unbiased as possible and just look at the rational law. And then as a party, you could look at the list of candidates in a particular area and say, look, we're going to advocate for these judges based on the philosophy that we, espouse. And I think that could be really helpful, because I know it for me personally in the past, voting for judges and things has been, it's like you don't know anything about them. And
don't
it's
know,
hard to even know where to look to find information about it.
right.
And for this
And
podcast, actually, the next time an election comes around, I'm actually going to look at all the judges and do a deep dive to
yeah,
see
no,
what I can find.
that would actually be a good thing, because there are a few things that I have gone out and researched on judges. Usually, again, to your point, they tend to have some kind of political bent to it, right?
Mhm.
It's like some group that is tough on crime or whatever. And, here are our recommendations for judge, that
Yeah,
kind of thing. It's like, okay. But there really isn't an objective resource,
right.
to the extent that you can be objective, um, for judges. And I mean, it's just like, there's been several times where it's like, you know what, I can't vote for any of these people because I don't know anything about them.
I've done the same things where I just don't vote on it because I don't know enough about what's going on to make a good decision. But as I say, I want to try and change that. And even
Yeah,
if I look into it as someone who has a fair intellect and a fair amount of resources, I should be able to find, the basic
sure.
information I need to make a judge. And either I'll report that I have made a conclusion about who I think would be the best candidate, or come out and say, look, I looked and looked and looked, and I have no idea. Because, and
Right.
that's the other part of it, if it's a transparency issue where you're just not able to get information about the judges that you're expected to vote for, well, then that's the issue for the party. There needs to be more transparency in who we're voting for. We need to understand what these judges are doing in their courtrooms before we're
Right.
in a position to actually have to vote for them. And so again, part of the party is sort of an advocacy role. And I think in the judicial sphere, that's something that could really be good for a third party.
Oh, absolutely. No, it would be, I know I would really value that, as long as it's coming from a independent voice, an independent place where, hey, we're not, like you said, we're looking for a fair umpire. We're not looking for
Right.
any particular cause or whatever. Um, that would be a huge, huge value.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most people are like we are. It's like they get the ballot and they go,
Yeah.
no, but unless you've been in the judicial system in some form, oh, I know that judge, because
Yeah, right.
you're either a lawyer or a defendant or something. But for the vast majority of people, fortunately,
Mhm.
we have not been part of that.
Yep.
And, it's like, man, I have no idea. I have
Yeah.
no idea.
Yeah. And so
Yeah,
as I say, I just think that's one of those things. And
that's
again,
a great idea.
even though, and I have my own biases, but what
Sure.
I think is important too, and why I think the idea of a party is important, is because I'm putting my biases out on the table. This is what I'm looking for. So when I advocate for this, this is what I'm seeing. Now, if you don't agree with my philosophy, then you're
Right.
probably not going to agree with my pick either. But at least you know what it is and why I'm making it. I,
Exactly.
I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not trying to kind of hide anything. It's just like, hey, here it is. You agree, you don't agree, but at least you know where people stand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
And
absolutely.
the other thing that I kind of wanted to bring up too was the whole presumption of innocence thing, because there's been a lot of stuff floating around over the years, recently about the idea of, well, the person that I'm thinking of specifically is Trevor Bauer. He was a pitcher for the Dodgers. I don't know if you've ever heard about him.
The name's really familiar.
Well, anyway, he was accused of a whole bunch of really bad stuff, a whole bunch of sexual assault stuff.
Okay.
And obviously, you get the calls for, you have to believe the accusers, and they have to, it has to be fair, and hashtag me too, and all that stuff. And as time has gone on, it's been more or less shown that the women that were accusing him lied. I think one of them has even recently been charged with fraud. So,
Wow.
but the thing that happened is that he lost his job. He was a major league pitcher, and now I guess he's pitching in Mexico or something. I don't know all the details of it.
Right.
But my point is that the presumption of innocence is so important, not in just how cases are tried, but in how people are treated in the public. And my thing is that I think you do have to believe the accusers. If you make an accusation, especially if something like very serious, like rape or sexual assault,
Right.
those should be taken seriously, and they absolutely should be investigated. And if criminal charges are warranted, criminal charges should absolutely be brought. But at the same time, while the investigation is going on, I don't think people can be punished preemptively
Right.
for, allegations. And I think
Right.
we've been seeing that it's come up, a lot of times. There was the I don't remember all of them, but things like the Duke lacrosse scandal, where a bunch of students were expelled, and there's
Right.
been some other
Yep.
things in colleges
Yep.
like that and stuff. And it's like uh, the presumption of innocence is fundamental to American judicial system, and has been since the founding of the country. I mean, it's one of the things that truly sets the United States apart from other places, that
Right.
you do have this presumption of innocence. And I think we need to get back to that more. And I think as a political party, that's another thing that you can say, look, I understand, and I believe that, victims of abuse and assault should always be, believed, and appropriate
Absolutely.
measures should be taken. But that doesn't mean presumptive punishment for anyone who gets accused of anything on the day they get accused of it.
Yeah. Well, and the challenge again, the challenge with that one is all these things are being tried in the media or in the public, right? So
Exactly.
the one that comes to mind to me is I think it was San Diego State, right? The punter who got
Yep.
drafted by New England, and then
Yep.
all this stuff came out about he was involved in this gang rape or allegedly a gang rape.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as it's turned out, they basically, the case is, no, we're not going through with this case. There's not enough evidence, and so, but during that whole time, he's been basically deemed guilty, right? And
Right.
he lost his job, right? Now I
Right.
think
I think he was kicking for the Buffalo Bills or something, wasn't he? He was in
was
NFL.
it Buffalo? Yeah, maybe it was Buffalo. Yeah, you're right. And then so now I think he's back into the system because they said, hey, there's the, it was consensual and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They decided not to. But in the meantime, he
Yeah.
was
Years
he
of
was
his life and
SOL,
income,
man.
his reputation destroyed. And
Right.
that's what I'm saying. It's like, again, we can't have a system where somebody reports an assault and then they're just like, whatever, go away.
Right.
That can never be the case. But at the same time, while the investigation is happening,
Right.
because you are presumed to be innocent, people should be able to
Absolutely.
get on with their lives. And a single accusation, or even multiple accusations, shouldn't destroy your life, prior to
Right.
ever having a chance to defend yourself.
Right. Yeah. No, again, but the only, and I totally agree with you. The only challenge is how do you stop the media frenzy, particularly on social media, because that's what it's become. It's become this scenario, whether you agree or disagree with the allegations, people just pile on. It was we were talking to my not unrelated to the whole crime thing. My son was telling us about this one actress who was up for because he works in that world,
Mhm.
was up and heard about this actress who's going to be in this role for this TV series coming up. And the fans of that particular series were just all up in arms. And this person wasn't the right person. And she's not pretty enough for this role and all, and just destroyed her. And so they ended up not hiring her, and it was like, and I only tell that story just because that's the crazy part of now we've got this snake on the loose that we can't,
Yeah.
corral anymore with
Yeah.
social media. It's just destroying people over whether it's a crime or whatever the issue is, but in particular crime, because that probably has the most devastation to somebody.
Well,
when they're not even guilty.
Yeah. And again, the social media aspect of things and the sort of the tabloid nature of certain charges and accusations and things, that's always going to be there. And I don't know that there's really much you could really functionally
do anything about it.
Right. But at the same time, if you have a voice and you can advocate for saying, hey, look, let's at least find out what actually happened here before we jump to any conclusions. It's like there needs to be at least some calming, voice out there saying, look, we can have a situation where we both respect the rights of people making accusations and the rights of those being accused. It is possible, I believe, to have that.
That's the whole concept.
Right. And that's the thing. And that's why you have to have the presumption of innocent, but you also, again, and it goes back to the idea of prosecutors, you have to have prosecutors that are out there looking. It's like, okay, these accusations were made. My job is an advocate for justice and to see that victims are, protected and that wrongdoers are prosecuted. I am now going to look into this and I'm going to find out the facts of the matter and then make decisions about, what happens from there. But when you have people that are political in those positions of prosecutors who's like, the tabloids are saying that this guy's a bad guy. Maybe I can get promoted if I go after him. Well, that's terrible. That's like the worst possible, scenario that you can have, because then you basically have tabloid-driven justice system, which in some respects I think we have now. And why I think it's such absolutely important to say we need prosecutors who are seeking justice. If there are victims, the victims need to, have their day in court and need to have an advocate in the prosecutors who are seeking justice for victims. Yeah. And the people being prosecuted, by God, have a right to have a defense and a vigorous defense. And that's the adversarial system that we're supposed to have. That's the, role of the prosecutor, and that is the presumption of innocence, all working together the way they're supposed to, and that gives us back our judicial system that we want. But there needs to be somebody pushing to actually have that, rather than just, having two groups of people who both want their partisans in those positions.
Yeah, right now it is. It's kind of, it's got to be an either or thing, when reality is it's not either or, it's and.
Yeah.
Right? It needs to be both. It needs to be legitimate prosecution when it warrants it, but at the same time, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. I mean, that's so much of what we talk about, I don't know if you've noticed this, is going back to the fundamentals of what allegedly is written in the Constitution.
Yeah, no, and I'm aware of that, because that's sort of the way I think about things. But the other part of it is too, is like, if you don't trust the judiciary,
right,
then you're not going to trust the results of anything. And the judiciary is the arbiter of all things. I mean, you look at all the cases over the years where they've had to decide political issues. Bush v. Gore is sort of where I get my grounding, where I started looking at these kind of things.
Right.
And it's like, well, that's a political question. I mean, it's Bush v. Gore, right? It is political. But by and large, people at that time, less so now, had faith that the Supreme Court was basically making decisions based on the law.
Yeah.
And so they made a decision, and that decision was respected. But now you've got all the Trump stuff swirling around. I mean, regardless of how it ends, both sides would agree that it was just a decision of law that was made and that they can trust that decision and move forward from there? Or is, regardless of the outcome, some huge faction of people is going to be absolutely up in arms, screaming bloody
absolutely.
murder.
Oh, yeah, no. There's no good outcome to this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right now. It's kind of scary. But I mean, it's going to get decided, and it just depends on who's going to be the ones that go crazy and not believing in it. And
Yeah.
and they'll all have their reasons, for their position, which I get, but it's just sad that we're at that point now where it has become so political for something that we've been pretty reliable on when it comes to elections.
Yeah.
Nobody's really questioned stuff.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. Well, I know we don't have enough time, and I probably shouldn't even bring up this, but it's a topic because we probably could spend a whole show on this next one, but it's related to what you're talking about, is the whole idea of bail reform. Got me thinking about that.
Yeah.
And so maybe we have to wait later because
honestly, I would say for that one, I think there is a lot to talk about on that, and theoretically, we've already gone just about our half an hour, which we're supposed to do. So I think maybe that would be a good one for next week.
It is, because it's related, because as you were talking about, it's going, man, this is also related to this, that we need to discuss this one, because I think that's another area where a third party could come out very clear on the right balance there.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave it there.
The last thing, I was going to say, the last thing I'll say on it is I just think that the position of a new party would be to actively attempt to depoliticize the judiciary. And that would be the simple way of putting it.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's just a cornerstone. And really, people are not taught that is, again, another differentiator for a third party.
Absolutely.
People are really not, they're talking about it from one side or the other.
Right.
That we're either not helping victims enough, or we're not helping the defendants enough, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, hey, both have to be represented equally and properly.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, hey, you're not a criminal until you're actually convicted.
Exactly. But yeah, there's talk over, my entire lifetime about how the judiciary and the judicial system targets, certain groups of people, treats different groups of people differently. And that should be abhorrent to everyone.
Absolutely.
The judiciary should absolutely treat everyone exactly the same. And you should have a political party that comes out and says the judiciary should treat everybody exactly the same.
Right. No, absolutely. And obviously it gets into the details like we've been talking about, as far as how do you make that happen.
Right.
Which is, it's always devil's in the details, but it is something we have definitely moved away from, right, wrong, or indifferent, depending on what your persuasion is. At the end of the day, we have moved so far away from what the foundations, I think, that were put in place with the Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah. Reverence for the Constitution, reverence for the rule of law, and then fair treatment of all people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at that level, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Now, actually, there's always been issues on both sides, but the idea is really simple, and it's really hard to argue against, right?
Yeah. And then the thing is, as I say, if you create something new, you can really mean it. That would be a founding principle of the new party. And then it's like, we mean these things. We're not just saying it for lip service. When we created the party, this was the idea behind it. This is a founding core principle of our new party, is that you should have a fair and equal justice system. Justice should be blind. And that's really the way it should be.
Right. Yeah. All for that. Now, that's good. Hey, this is perfect. Hey, we're wrapping up right on time. And we haven't talked much about the whole criminal judicial area at all.
Yeah.
So, and it's one that I think we all kind of live with, but we don't really think about what is driving this.
Yeah. It's
and
super
it really
important.
has come down to, it has come down to so much more politics being injected into the judicial system that we've never had before.
Yep.
Well, I should say we've always had it.
Yeah, it's always been there.
It's always been there, but now it's just more evident, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Good one. All right. Well, now I got to go start doing research on judges.
Yeah, never
And I need to go
ending.
do more research on bail reform.
Yeah.
So that's our assignments for next week.
Yeah. The ever growing laundry list of things that we need to talk about.
Exactly. All right, man. Talk to you then.
Yep. See you soon.